Hello and good evening, and thank you all so much for coming to the York Festival of Ideas. My name is Joan Concannon. I'm director of York Festival of Ideas. It's great to see so many of you who are interested in underwear. I'm very pleased. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Nina Edwards. Nina is a freelance writer based in London and has written books including Darkness, A Cultural History, and Pizzazz, The Impact and Resonance of White Clothing. I sort of half got there, purely by accident, I have to say. Today, she's going to talk to us about our most personal garments. Nina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. But before I begin, excuse me for reading, but I have vertigo. I don't know if any of you have ever had it, but it means that I suddenly fall over. I shall try not to do that today, but it does mean that also my mind has been jumbled up. But it's just, it'll go away, I'm told, in one way or another. Anyway, just to explain, if I stumble, I'm not drunk, I promise. And I want to, as was suggested, I've written about some disparate subjects, although to me they all seem connected because they're about things that have interested me. It's as simple as that. I think they're connected because I'm one person and I'm interested in fashion, I'm interested in our emotions and how one is affected by the other. I wanted to write about what seemed to be overlooked on subjects that were apparently considered to be of little or no interest at all. Small matters, and yet I think they have surprising significance. For underwear, as I was beginning to think about it, by the way, it all began because I wrote about white clothing, and the one chapter where I had more to say was the underwear chapter. And so then you think, oh, good, I'll know what, well, to a certain extent, I'll be able to write about it. For underwear, two stories sprung to mind. Years ago, I took a job sewing for the puppeteer Jim Henson of Muppets fame. I was acting and out of work. He wanted to create a luxurious clothing collection to advertise his film Dark Crystal. You may have seen it, it actually died the death. Apart from a half dozen sumptuous evening dresses, most of us, all three of us, were employed to make small gift items from the fabric offcuts of these dresses. The beautiful silks that had been printed, and they didn't want to waste anything. I was taught how to sew with leather and make buttonholes in fragile silk. Here's why it mattered to this project. Our workshop was run by Jill, who'd previously overseen the making of underpants and bras for Marks and Spencer. It was wonderful to be tutored by someone so knowledgeable, and I fell for sewing all over again. And this was nothing at all like offering to help a wardrobe mistress to tack together costumes for a touring company. This was couturier craft, or so I like to think. A second story concerns my search for suitable images for underwear. You don't want it to be too crude, but a little crude. You don't want it to be too formal. It's very difficult to know what the level should be. And also, so many images are expensive to get hold of. So that's when a friend who at 75 still had a knockout figure asked if I'd be interested in an image of her bra and pants. She pegged them all out on one of those cartwheel dryers. Lacy, and in many colours. And I come from a generation where one wore black pants, full stop. Not much else. But here was this woman who, unknown to me, had this cornucopia of colour in her underwear. Strictly no white or black for her. I'd very much like to have included them, but somehow a dour snap of a Kiev underwear stall was felt to have more gravitas by my editor. Well, of course it did, but it... Underwear is by definition worn under other clothing, mostly. It guards our modesty, and it's practical, protecting our tenderest parts from rougher outer clothing. It also protects that outer layer from the emanations of our sweaty bodies. It's usually comfortable, or it's meant to be, and saves on the bother and expense of laundry. Then I struggled with the idea of underwear as fashionable. It's curious if one wasn't going to see it much except at some, I don't know, catwalk underwear show. Generally, it's worn beneath other clothing. Fashion needs to be seen by others to show off la bella figura. There are those who deliberately hide their designer-labeled high-end underwear beneath a more ordinary, less fashion-conscious outer layer. Are they shy, or do they simply prefer to be private? Are they waiting for some imagined future intimacy? It pays to be prepared not only in case of a traffic accident, but also, if romantically inclined, for some unexpected tryst. One lives in hope. Underwear can transform our bodies. Foundation garments for women, such as corsets, girdles, bras, etc., and for men, the long history of their corsets. Think Velázquez's black Spanish court. All are capable of transforming the body into the silhouette of the moment, or so we may hope. My own grandfather was best-dressed man in Leicester between the wars, and he insisted upon holding his socks up with suspenders. And so I always thought this was immensely stylish until I realized that it was also a joke. People seemed to think it was funny. A slave in ancient Egypt wore a hemp loincloth to protect his genitals as he worked in the field. But then so did pharaohs. They're often depicted in very similar garments, but now made of the finest, most translucent linen. I loved the fact that it was a fabric so prized that it became a significant form of currency. The poor have very often had to do without. My mother told me about her embarrassment at 16, and surely underwear, we're meant to feel some elements of embarrassment, aren't we? She was tasked to explain something to a group of country girls of a similar age. Like her, they were nursing assistants, helping out in a soldier's convalescent home during the Second World War. She had to distribute and explain why they were all now required to wear knickers, mentioning not only their practicality, but also she was told in a roundabout way that she should suggest their moral significance. How do you do that? The history of underwear until recently has tended to concentrate on what the higher orders wore, but have ignored the clothing and underwear in particular of the majority. Many continue to wear underpants until they're worn out. Thus, it's often true that only the finest special occasion underwear survives into our museum collections. And this can give a very misleading impression, I think. An Elizabethan male courtier, on the other hand, is often portrayed with broad padded chest and puffed out velvet hips, goose-bellied, and sporting a jewelled and padded codpiece. To a modern eye, although we have seen them on the runways for 3 years now in male clothing, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed. To a modern eye, the codpiece may appear to refer to the whole package, as it were, the genitals en masse. Yet the word refers solely to the testicles, cod meaning scrotum. Thus, in Elizabethan times, the codpiece relates to procreation rather than sexual prowess, as it might today, or showing off. It represented the wealth of the wearer and his ability to procreate, a means pre-DNA testing to vaunt his ability to further his own bloodline. Moreover, the codpiece was also a useful pocket in which to keep small essentials, really. You might not need all of the space, after all. Such as a handkerchief, money, a refreshing orange, tangerine, or perhaps a poultice for one's venereal disease. No, but it's true. Such was the pain of such an affliction, and widely suffered affliction, that codpieces were regularly used for this purpose of fresh dressing. A woman in Tudor times was expected to reflect the ability of her male provider to afford her upkeep. This may be familiar to you, by the way, about another time, but if her clothing demonstrated her wealth and rank, she would increase the status of her male thereby. She tended to be more tightly corseted, and her farthingale petticoat impeded all but the most courtly movement, for she could neither sit nor walk easily. Corsetry goes largely unseen, but it can inhibit bodily movement. It confines the wearer so that they could not possibly engage in physical labor, but it can also seem suggestive. Today's deliberately restrictive clothing, and perhaps high platform shoes, might be said to fall into the same category as tight corsets and farthingales by creating the impression of women as objects of admiration. The wearer is impractically and expensively dressed, and therefore one assumes they're leading a leisurely life. Discuss. I'm not sure about that either. But later, as various fashions came and went, society was duly shocked, and yet soon thrilled by such changes. What they'd once yearned for had become hopelessly out of fashion. For instance, consider women in semi-transparent muslin empire-line shifts. See Jane Austen Productions. What had once been the undergarment, the chemise for women and the shirt for men, had become outerwear. These flimsy 19th century dresses, which once had been undergarments, in due course eventually became the hidden petticoat and nightdress of the Victorian gentlewoman. In the 1920s, the simple shift dress re-emerges as the fashionable silhouette, but this time cut short. Go still further forward to the 60s, and we have Mary Quant mini dresses. They're actually very simple in pattern. Fashion is a creature of change, striving for the new, but also constantly looking to the past for inspiration. Where else can it come from, I would say? Men of fashion in the 1820s, in their skin-tight, pale, flesh-coloured proto-trousers, represented by the elegant Beau Brummel in England, mimicked the creamy nakedness of recently discovered Greek statuary. It required the finest knitted silk underpants to avoid spoiling their elegant, uncreased line. These long-legged linings, it's difficult to say, became thicker and made of wool, and were known as long johns, worn by the well-to-do of Europe and America, and evidently became more standard male underwear. Think dead drunk Lee Marvin in Cat Balloon. Red, worn out red long johns. There's a later similarity with early mountaineer and polar exploration gear, gradually becoming the opportunity for sportswear and casual dress, slowly, increasingly worn as outerwear, using the newest stretchy but quick-to-dry fabrics to provide the tightest fit. Underwear has seldom been entirely discreet. What we wear and why we choose to wear what we do depends on contemporary tastes. Yet for clothing that is defined by its private nature as a largely hidden garment, our choice of underwear, or its omission altogether, can betray individual character traits. Here, I'd love to hear what you think. Might a quiet person sometimes conceal all the most up-to-the-minute, saucy underpinnings beneath his shapeless unisex joggers? Do hope so. Do the fashionably minded attend to their underwear much more closely than those who profess not to care about their clothing at all, so long as it fits the purpose and is ordinary enough not to embarrass them? Might it be that hidden beneath an elegantly fashionable surface lurk aspects of cozy comfort or nostalgia? Lucky old underpants, or a favourite greying, saggy bra, both now surely bound to secure me that job, or a tried and tested red thong, help me get lucky. Sorry about that. Mightn't the practically uniformed paramedic say, keep her spirits up with a secret layer of sumptuous underwear? Lycra, from 1958 only, the wonder material of our times, with its extraordinary ability to stretch and keep its form, at least allows us perhaps to deceive ourselves about our size and firmness. We can all be medium. Some ancient history, the vanquished, since ancient history, the vanquished have often been stripped naked or down to their underclothing. Like Marie Antoinette on her way to the guillotine, in order to best shame them. We've all seen photographs, perhaps, following the liberation of Paris in 1944, showing young women accused of collaboration, surrounded by baying crowds, with shorn heads, barefoot and bruised, and with their outer clothing more or less stripped away. To force prisoners to expose their vulnerable bodies has long been an effective means of humiliation. I note that President Trump is now planning to export non-citizens of America to a notorious El Salvador detention center, where inmates are photographed in shackles and boxer shorts alone to demonstrate their total lack of individual freedom, like cogs in some vast impersonal machine. Of course, some underwear is sexually explicit, some singularly expensive, but much of what is on offer is remarkably similar. When it's difficult to distinguish between an upper or medium-priced item from a cheap one in Primark, then other means have to be found to express our longing for luxury. A fashion of 2023, you might have noticed, showed in many photographs the actor Katie Holmes in a cashmere bra, knitted cashmere bra, beneath a matching cardigan designed to fall off the shoulder and expose the bra beneath. Its singular impracticality heightened the wearer's status by the need to hand wash or go to the expense of dry cleaning. Is it a peculiarly British reaction to feel embarrassment at even the mention of underwear? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We each of us have to decide what to wear beneath our outer clothing from time to time, and our choices reveal how we think about ourselves, or possibly how we'd like to be seen and thought of by others. You could say that in this respect, underwear allows us to be daring because it's hidden. This is true even for those who furiously deny any interest whatsoever. In fact, they only hold true to what is practical in what they wear. They're very rare, and I'm afraid very likely that most of us would think of them as eccentric. Perhaps that doesn't matter, but women's status is more often tied to how we are seen more than men. Our bodies and how our bodies are judged allow questions about masculinity and femininity to remain. Greater understanding and acceptance of other gendered possibilities merely present further confusion, it seems to me, in our need to make such clothing choices. Punitive underwear has borne a number of commonly held hoaxes over the centuries. One such is the chastity belt, said to have been worn by the wives of men setting out for the Crusades. No example of this form of underwear has ever been found. Only much later copies. I could hardly believe this, so I went to the British Museum and asked them, been laughing about this for years. What do you mean? There aren't any. They showed me a print of a woman lying back on her bed in a chastity belt, with her husband in coupled donkey ears, waving the key at her as he exited towards war. Behind the bedpost, her lover gleefully holds the other key. On the other hand, the hair shirt is well documented and is still being made in the current century, worn as a means of repentance and self-mortification. In Jewish culture, it was once worn for mourning. In Roman Catholic practice, it's still worn, but usually only during Lent. Even Ivan the Terrible wore one, as he professed to want to die like a monk, even if he had not quite lived like one. In 2023, there was a craze for wearing black fishnet stockings and suspenders. A street fashion, really, certainly in London. I don't know how much. I'd be interested to know how countrywide it was. Usually by younger women, and the stockings were meant to be slightly torn to show. Worn with shorts, they cut a dash, I thought. I found myself walking behind such a girl in a micro mini with a couple who I guessed pretty soon were her parents. The couple revealed themselves with the woman regularly whispering to the girl then twisting back and trying to pull at her skirt to cover her crutch. Her father held his head aloft. This was all beneath him, appearing to take no notice at all. Fashion alone cannot completely banish the dreadful embarrassment of accidentally flashing your knickers. Or perhaps for a man to forget to zip up. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. That's it.